I need to start this story the way it actually started. Not with the texts, not with the hotel receipt I found in the pocket of his gray jacket, and not with the night I sat in my car in our own driveway for 40 minutes because I couldn't figure out how to walk into my own house. It started with a feeling. I know that sounds vague. I know people say that and roll their eyes, like a feeling is just an excuse women use to justify being controlling or paranoid or, and this is the word that was used on me more times than I can count, crazy. But the feeling was specific. It wasn't anxiety in a general, floating kind of way. It was targeted. It was the kind of thing where you're sitting across from someone at dinner, someone you've shared a bed with for 3 years, someone who knows how you take your coffee and which side of the mattress you need to sleep on or you can't fall asleep. And you look at them, and something in the back of your skull just quietly says, he is not here. His body was there. He was eating the pasta I'd made. He was telling me about a podcast he'd listened to on his commute, but he was not there. And the worst part wasn't the feeling itself. The worst part was that when I tried to say something about it, when I said, hey, are you okay? You seem distant lately. He looked at me with this expression I can only describe as practiced patience, like a kindergarten teacher dealing with a kid who's asked the same question for the fourth time. And he said, Megan, you do this every few months. You get into this headspace and you project it onto me. I'm fine. I'm just tired. And I said, okay, because what else do you say to that? My name is Megan. I'm 31. I married Daniel when I was 27, after 2 years of dating, after a proposal on a hiking trail that I found genuinely romantic and not at all cliche because he knew I loved that trail and had specifically picked a moment when the light was hitting the valley a certain way. And I genuinely thought, this man pays attention. I thought that for a long time. We were good together. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to rewrite history and say the whole marriage was a lie or that I should have seen it coming from day one, because I don't think that's true and I don't think it's useful. We were good together. We laughed at the same things. We had the same approach to money: save first, spend thoughtfully. We both wanted kids eventually, had the same number in mind, talked about it the way you talk about a plan that's real and coming and just not quite yet. He was the person I called when I had a hard day. He was the person I wanted to tell things to first. For 2 of the 3 years we were married, I would have staked everything I owned on the fact that he felt the same way about me. And then something shifted, slowly. Like a ship changing course by 1 degree, you don't notice it in the moment, but over time you end up somewhere completely different from where you meant to go. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Not the phone itself. He'd always had his phone. That's not suspicious. What I noticed was the relationship he started having with his phone. He'd always been someone who left his phone on the counter, face up, didn't think about it much. I could walk past it and see his screen, and it meant nothing because he wasn't the kind of person who made it mean something. Then I'd say around 14 months before everything fell apart, that changed. The phone started going with him everywhere: into the bathroom, to bed face down on his nightstand instead of face up, into the other room when he was just grabbing some water. I'd hear the lock click while I was lying in the dark waiting for him to come back to bed. I noticed I didn't say anything, not at first, because I knew what happened when I said things. I tried it before, the conversation didn't go well. But I noticed the second thing was the gym. Daniel had never been a gym person. In 5 years of knowing him, he'd had a gym membership twice, used it for maybe 3 weeks each time, and then let it quietly expire without mentioning it. This is not a criticism. I'm not a gym person either, it's just true. He joined a new gym in February. He started going 4 times a week. I thought, okay, good for him, new year, new habit, maybe something clicked. I was supportive. I said I was proud of him. I meant it. But then the gym sessions started running long. He'd leave at 7 and come back at 9:30, and when I said that's a long workout, he'd shrug and say he'd gone into the sauna after. When I said I didn't know they had a sauna, he said, "Yeah, it's pretty nice." And that was the end of it. I looked up the gym online once. Their website didn't mention a sauna. Maybe it was new, maybe I missed it. I told myself I'd missed it. I should tell you about my best friend, Kara, because she's important to this story. Kara and I have been friends since college. She's one of those people who will tell you the truth in a way that somehow doesn't feel like a punch, even when it probably should. She has a gift for it. I've always envied it a little. We got coffee in March. This is about 10 months before the end, and she asked me how things were going at home. I said fine. She looked at me over her cup for a long moment and said, "Okay, but how are things actually going?" And I told her about the phone and the gym and the distant feeling at dinner and the way I'd tried to bring it up and gotten the kindergarten teacher look. I told her I felt like I was going insane, that I was watching myself become the thing I'd always said I would never be, a suspicious, anxious wife who checks her husband's location and jumps when his phone buzzes. She listened to the whole thing. She didn't interrupt once. And then she said, "Megan, are you asking me if I think he's cheating?" I said I didn't know. I said I didn't want to say that word because saying the word made it real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real. She said, "I think you should trust what you're feeling. I've always known you to have good instincts, and I think you've been talking yourself out of them." I told her maybe she was right. Then I went home, and when Daniel asked how Kara was, I said, "Good, same as always." And I said nothing else, and I made dinner, and we watched a show, and I went to sleep next to a man I'd started to think of as a stranger. The work trip started in April. Before this, in 5 years, Daniel had traveled for work maybe 3 or 4 times total. His job was the kind of job that didn't require much travel. He worked in project management for a mid-sized logistics company. The travel happened, just not often. Starting in April, it started happening about once a month. One night trips, 2 night trips, Chicago, Atlanta, once Denver. I tracked them in my head the way you track things when you're trying to figure out if a pattern is real or if you're making one up. I started to understand why people make spreadsheets. Not because they're paranoid, but because your brain needs a place to put things. He always came back from these trips a specific kind of tired, not the drained, grimy exhaustion you come back with after real travel, but something softer, something almost relaxed. I mentioned the trips to my sister Jamie. She's 3 years older than me and married with 2 kids and has a very practical, cut to the chase way of looking at things. She said, "Is there a work trip coming up that you can verify?" I said yes. He had one in 2 weeks. Chicago again. She said, "Book a flight to Chicago." I said, "I can't just." She said, "Okay, then don't. But you could." I didn't book the flight. I've thought about that a lot since. I want to tell you about a specific Wednesday in June because it's the first moment where the feeling I'd been carrying around for months turned into something I couldn't rationalize away. It was a regular Wednesday. Daniel was home early, which was unusual. He said a meeting had been canceled. He seemed, I want to use the right word, contained, like he was being very careful about where he put himself in the house, how much space he was taking up, how loud he was. I was in the kitchen making tea when his phone lit up on the counter. He'd left it there, face up, the way he used to do before. I saw the notification. It was a text from a contact saved as Mark K, which, fine, perfectly normal name for a contact, except the preview said, "Can't wait for Thursday, Fi." Now, I'm aware of how this sounds. I'm aware that Mark K could be a real person sending an enthusiastic message about a work event or a sports thing or literally anything else. I'm aware that I only saw 4 words and a black heart, and that 4 words and a black heart are not evidence of anything. But the black heart, Daniel does not send black hearts. I have never in 5 years received a black heart from Daniel. He's not an emoji person at all. He types out words. The black heart was not Daniel's style, which meant it wasn't a style he'd developed with me. It was a style he'd developed with someone else. I stood there looking at that notification until it faded, and then I picked up my mug and I went into the living room and I sat next to my husband on the couch and I said nothing at all. Fear is where I want to be honest about something I'm not proud of. I went through his phone. He was in the shower. I had maybe 8 minutes. I went through his phone. I want to explain why I'm telling you this with full disclosure, even though I know a lot of people will say that's a violation, that you don't go through someone's private phone, that nothing I found can be used against him because of how I found it. I've heard all of this. I've said some of it to myself. But here is what I also know. I had been told for months that what I was feeling wasn't real. I had been told gently and then less gently that my instincts were a symptom of anxiety, that I was projecting, that I was doing that thing I do every few months where I spiral and drag everyone around me into it. I had been made to feel that my own perception of reality was unreliable. I needed to know, not for ammunition, not for revenge. I just needed to know if I was sane. The texts between Daniel and Mark K were not from Mark. I knew this within 30 seconds. The tone was wrong. The content was wrong. There were references to a restaurant in the South Loop that Mark K had loved when Daniel had taken her there. There was a message that said, I keep thinking about Saturday. I miss you already. There was a photo. I will not describe the photo. I put the phone back exactly where it was. I went into the bathroom. I ran cold water over my wrists for about 30 seconds, which is something I do when I need to physically reset. Then I dried my hands and I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink for a very long time. I was not crazy. I had never been crazy. Here is what I did not do. I did not immediately confront him. I know that's what you're expecting. I know that's what I expected of myself, actually, that there would be some dramatic scene, that I'd walk out of that bathroom a different person, that something would break open. But what I felt standing in the bathroom was not rage. It was not even sadness, exactly. It was something much stranger. It was relief, because the feeling that had been sitting in my chest for over a year finally had a name, and I had been right about it. And that mattered to me more than I can explain. I decided I needed to be careful. I needed to talk to someone, not Daniel, not yet. I needed to get my bearings. I texted Kara, can I come over tomorrow morning? She wrote back, yes, are you okay? I wrote no, but I will be. Kara cried before I did. That's such a Kara thing to do. I told her what I'd seen on the phone, and she put her hands over her mouth and her eyes filled up, and she said, Megan, I am so sorry. And I sat there dry-eyed and strangely calm, which I think scared her a little. She asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to do it correctly. I didn't want to blow up my life in a moment of emotion and then spend the next 5 years recovering from the explosion. I wanted to be strategic. Not cold. I wasn't feeling cold. I was feeling very, very clear. She suggested I talk to a lawyer before I talked to Daniel. I said I'd been thinking the same thing. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said she could let me sit on her couch for a while without talking. She said okay. We sat there for about an hour. She made tea. We watched part of a reality show neither of us was actually watching. At one point, she put her hand over mine and just kept it there. I didn't cry until I got to my car, and then I cried until the windows fogged up, and then I drove home. I met with a family attorney named Patricia 2 days later. She had the kind of office that felt deliberately calming, soft light, a plant in the corner, chairs that were actually comfortable. She was in her late 40s, practical and precise, and she had clearly heard every version of this story before, which I found oddly comforting. She asked me what I knew and what I could prove. I walked her through it. She told me that in our state, documented infidelity could be relevant to asset division depending on circumstances, but that the more important thing right now was to start quietly organizing. Joint accounts, shared assets, any paperwork I might need access to. She also said, do not say anything to him until you're ready. Readiness matters. People make decisions under emotional pressure that they later regret. I nodded. I was taking notes. I left that office feeling like I had a shape to move toward, even if the shape was still blurry. The next 2 weeks were surreal. I went through the motions. I made dinner. I watched television. I slept next to Daniel in our bed. I answered his questions about my day. I asked about his. I smiled at the right moments. I touched his arm when he passed me in the kitchen because that was a thing I did automatically, a physical habit 3 years in the making, and I didn't want to suddenly stop because then he'd notice something was different. I was gathering myself. That's the only way I can describe it. Like before a long jump, you don't run straight at it, you step back first. I went through our shared Google Drive one afternoon when he was at work. We'd used it for shared documents, tax returns, apartment lease scans, travel planning. It was mostly mundane, except for a folder I'd never noticed before. It was titled with my name, Megan. I thought for a second, confused, why would there be a folder with my name that I'd never opened? I opened it. It contained screenshots. Screenshots of my texts to friends, screenshots of my emails. I have never to this day figured out how he accessed my email, but he did. A screenshot of a conversation between me and Jamie where I'd said I was worried about the marriage. A screenshot of a voicemail transcript from when I'd called my mother and left her a message saying I wasn't doing well. He'd named the folder after me. He'd been documenting what I knew, or suspected, or said to other people. I don't know if this was because he was paranoid or because he was building ammunition in case I confronted him and he needed to turn it around on me. I don't know, and I never asked, and I don't think I ever will. But sitting there with that folder open on my laptop, I felt something new move through me, something colder than anything I'd felt yet. He hadn't just been lying to me, he'd been preparing to win. I called Patricia that afternoon. I told her about the folder. She said, "Okay, how soon do you want to move?" I said, "As soon as possible." We made a plan. It wasn't dramatic or elaborate. It was just practical and careful, the way I'd wanted it to be from the beginning. I moved money I was legally entitled to into a personal account. I made copies of every document I'd need. I arranged to stay with Jamie for a few weeks, told her I was coming, explained everything in one long phone call while I sat in a parking lot so Daniel wouldn't overhear. Jamie said, "Tell me what you need and I'll show up." I said I'd need her on a Thursday. She said, "I'll be there." The Thursday I chose was the same Thursday that Mark K. had been excited about in that text. I want to be clear about why I chose it, not because I wanted to catch him, not because I needed to see it to believe it. I chose it because I knew he would be out, and I wanted to not have this conversation while I was still in the house. I was wrong about the last part. He came home early again. I was in the bedroom, a half-full suitcase open on the bed, when I heard the front door. I heard him pause in the hallway, probably seeing the bags I'd already brought out. And then I heard his footsteps. And then he was standing in the doorway of our bedroom, looking at the suitcase, and then at me. "Noah," he said, "what's going on?" I said, "I'm leaving." He stood there for a moment. There were a few different expressions that moved across his face, and I watched them like someone watching weather move over a landscape. Finally, he said, "Megan, whatever you think." I said, "I don't think anything. I know. The folder you named after me is what convinced me, honestly. Not the texts, the folder." The expression that moved over his face then, I've spent a lot of time trying to name it. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't even shock. It was almost like the expression you make when you lose a chess, when the other person has made a move you genuinely didn't anticipate. He didn't say anything. I zipped the suitcase. He said, quietly, "You didn't have to go through mine now." I said, "I'm going to stop you there." I picked up the suitcase. I walked past him. I did not look back. Not because I was being dramatic, but because I knew that if I looked back I might cry, and I'd decided I was not going to cry in front of him. Jamie was parked outside. She'd been there for 20 minutes. When I got into the passenger seat, she looked at me and said, "You okay?" I said, "Drive." She drove. "I'm not going to give you a tidy ending. I'm not going to tell you I immediately felt free, or that the grief didn't come, or that the nights at Jamie's weren't sometimes really, really dark. They were. There's a particular kind of grief that comes when you lose a person and a life at the same time. It's different from just missing someone. It's missing someone and simultaneously dismantling the entire architecture of your future. Every plan and assumption and image you carried around of what the next 10, 20, 30 years were supposed to look like. It's like taking a map you've had since you were 25 and standing in a field and setting it on fire. Even when you know the map was wrong, even when you know you were being driven somewhere you didn't choose, you still had the map and now you don't. That's the part nobody warns you about. The grief is not just for him, it's for who you were when you trusted him. Daniel tried to reach me 3 times in the first week. I didn't respond. On the fourth attempt, he sent a long message. I won't share the whole thing, in which he said he was sorry, that he'd made terrible mistakes, that he'd been going through something and had handled it completely wrong. He also, near the end, said that he hoped I understood his side would have been complicated to explain. His side. I read it once, then I shared it with Patricia because that's what you do. Then I closed the message and I didn't open it again. A month after I left, through mutual friends, I found out that the person behind Mark K was a woman he'd met through work. Her real name was something else entirely. I don't know how long it had been going on. At a certain point, I stopped trying to reconstruct the timeline because the timeline didn't matter. The answer was long enough. I'm 9 months out now. I'm still at Jamie's, technically, though I've been looking at apartments. I have a therapist I see every 2 weeks who is the best $80 I've ever spent. Kara and I talk almost every day. My mother, who lives far enough away that she couldn't come when it was happening, came for a visit last month and made me soup every night and didn't push me to talk about things I wasn't ready to talk about. I've learned things about myself in the last 9 months that I don't think I would have learned otherwise. I've learned that I actually know how to be alone. That one surprised me. I spent so long being afraid of what it would feel like to be without a partner that I didn't realize being with the wrong partner was already a kind of alone, a lonelier kind, because at least when you're actually on your own, you're not also confused about why you feel that way. I've learned that trusting your instincts is not the same as being paranoid, but that people who benefit from you not trusting yourself will work very hard to convince you those things are the same. And I've learned, this is the one I sit with the most, that the moment I should have taken most seriously wasn't the texts, or the gym, or the work trips. It was the first time I brought something up, said, hey, I feel like something's off, and was told that the problem was my perception and not his behavior. That was the moment. Because a person who loves you and has nothing to hide does not respond to your concern with a lesson about your tendency to spiral. They respond with a conversation. I wish I'd known that sooner, but I know it now, and I won't forget it. If you've read this far, whether this resonates with something you're living or something you've been through, or whether you're just here because you wanted to know how it ended, I hope you take this with you. You are not crazy for feeling what you feel. You are not paranoid for noticing what you notice. And the right person, the person worth staying for, will never make you feel like your gut is the enemy.